38-13 Colorado with a disappointing season opener. Brian, it was 7-6 at halftime. Colorado dominated the time of possession. It was like missed opportunities turned into just a disastrous second half for the Buffs.
Yeah, there was a question asked about that, as if that was a bright spot, and Carl Durrell said, frankly, I can't find a whole lot of bright spots, but said, I appreciate you as a reporter trying to figure that out. That wasn't my question, but I agree with him. It's hard to find bright spots tonight. I mean, the missed opportunities in the first half. The second half was just completely anemic, until a pretty meaningless touchdown there at the end. And it was a tough one to watch. I mean, you and I had some optimism a little bit coming in. I projected a win. I thought that this team was underrated, and I didn't think this was going to be a great team. I thought it was very underrated. I come away from this thinking, boy, I was way wrong, and really changes my perception of this season, to be honest with you.
Yeah. And beyond just the disappointment of the final score, we heard Brady Russell, one of the leaders of this football team, voted one of the 4 team captains, say he was really frustrated that guys' heads were hanging on the sideline and that they're kind of reverting back to expectations and where this program's been. And so it's just, I mean, as bad as you can expect, not only the final score, but to hear something like that after just one game.
Yeah, and Quinn Perry, another one of the captains, was sitting next to him and agreed with him. He said he thought he saw the same thing. So that's concerning. I guess on the one hand you can look at it and say that's game one. They see it, maybe they can fix it. But I think it's concerning when you spend the whole offseason. It wasn't just those 2 guys. It was a lot of people on this team talking about how close this team was, how the leadership was much better overall. Frankly, kind of calling out leadership in the past, saying it wasn't very good. It's much better now. One game in, you're talking about how leaders need to step up and that this guys were hanging their heads. That's a leadership problem, and that's a locker room problem right now. That they both said it. They said that didn't show up at all in fall camp, so maybe that shocked them as much as anybody. But I think that's one of the biggest things that you take away from this is, wow, this team maybe is not as close and and mature as maybe they kept telling us.
Well, it's a leadership issue if it goes into week 2, right? Yeah. I mean, I think this is where you need to see if the leadership has improved on this team, if the unity's there, then you'll see a different football team down in Colorado Springs. Obviously, the hot topic is quarterback. It was all off-season and leading up to the season, and Brendan Lewis gets a lot of flack. And you don't want to pile on 19, 20-year-old, that's playing college football. But it felt clear to everybody kind of going into the second half that Shrout, even though he might take some chances and make mistakes, gives this team a puncher's chance. It gives them an opportunity to move the ball and have some fireworks on offense. And asked Carl Durrell how tough of a decision that was at halftime. He said it wasn't, that their plan was to roll with Brendan Lewis. It wasn't much of a discussion, it sounds like. That's surprising. Yeah. I don't know. Again, I really like Brendan Lewis. I enjoy covering his recruiting. He's a good young man. He did some nice things in the first half with some of those drives. They dominated the time of possession, but he had 78 yards passing, and he was the quarterback for the bulk of the series. It's every once in a while you see something and you go, okay, that's an area he's improved from last year. He's not a finished product, but it just feels like it's clear to everybody else that Shrout gives him a better opportunity, yet he has not been given that opportunity. It's one game in, and maybe JT Shrout gets to start next week. It's a little bit perplexing, no?
Yeah, and I agree with Brady Russell. He got frustrated in the post game and said, hey, I don't understand why people pile on the quarterback so much. There's a lot of people on that team that they can mess up as well, and he's right. But there's a reason why Russell Wilson signed a contract for $50 million a year this week, right? Quarterbacks make the money because that's the most important position on the field. That guy is supposed to be your leader, your best guy on offense. That's just the way it is. That's football. And I get it. There's all those other guys, but we haven't seen it out of Brendan Lewis. And I agree with you. I like him. I think he's got some qualities, but there wasn't a whole lot of spark. And JT played the last 2.5 minutes of the first half. He didn't get any points, but a big thing for Carl Durrell, he's told us, is when you're backed up against the end zone, getting out. You don't have to score, but get out. That's what he did. He comes in, his first play as a Buff, they're backed up at the 1 yard line. 2 plays later, they're at midfield. He throws a 5-yard run, and then he throws a 40-yard pass. They didn't score, and it was a Hail Mary at the end, but he did that job on that drive by getting them out of trouble there and not preventing more damage. And then he doesn't come in again until it's 24-6 and pretty much out of hand. And I thought that was I thought that was disappointing. I don't know. I wouldn't say it cost them the game. I think it cost them a shot to win the game.
And the other question that from a decision-making standpoint would be, it's 4th and 5, you're on the TCU 41-yard line. The game is still in reach at that point. You punt it, it goes in the end zone, and it's basically 21 yards gained of possession. Stating the obvious here, I know every CU fan that watched the game realizes that they probably disagree with that decision. Yeah. What were your thoughts there?
Yeah, I disagree with it. I mean, at that point, you're reeling a little bit. You know, your defense has given up a touchdown and then a field goal in the first 2 drives for TCU. It's a pivotal moment in the game. It was 17-6 at that point. You're inside their territory. It's not a great spot. You're at the 41. You're not going to kick a 58-yard field goal, but you're sort of in no man's land. I mean, I think most convention says go for it right there. It's 4th and 5. Go for it. If you don't get it, okay. They're still not deep in your territory. I mean, they're not in your territory at all, right? Go for it. Give your offense a shot. If you make that play, get a 6-yard play, you keep going, and you score a touchdown. Now it's 17-13. Completely different ballgame going in the fourth quarter. Instead, you punt it, goes into the end zone, they go down, score. It's 24-6 ballgame.
Game was obviously way out of reach at this point. Jordan Tyson with his first touchdown as a Buff. The other silver lining, I guess you would say, is that this is a really healthy football team. That's not an excuse for their performance tonight. I know R.J. Sneed, he didn't have a ton of snaps out there. I'd imagine they're kind of easing him back in because he didn't get a whole lot of practice time. But this is a healthy football team going forward. So that's one area you might hang on to some hope if you're a CU fan.
Yeah, and you did have R.J. Sneed, didn't have a whole lot of practice. Tommy Brown was in there a lot. He'd only had about a week and a half of practice. Trevor Woods was in there. I thought he played pretty well, but he didn't have a whole lot of practice going in. You are a healthy team. It's one game. You and I were talking about it coming down here. I don't want to put too much on one game and judge an entire season off of just tonight. But man, there's a lot of stuff tonight that makes it hard to really project much, hope going forward.
All right. Again, Colorado loses their season opener. They'll be at Air Force next week.